The Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 10th chapter. Jesus said to the 12, "A disciple is not above the teacher, nor a slave above the master. It is enough for the disciple to be like the teacher, and the slave like the master. If they had called the master of the house Beelzebub, how much more will they malign those of his household? So have no fear of them, for nothing is covered up that will not be uncovered, and nothing secret that will not become known. But I say to you in the dark, tell in the light, and what you hear whispered, proclaim from the housetops. Do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather fear him who can destroy both body and soul in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father. And even the hairs of your head are all counted. So do not be afraid. You are of more value than sparrows. Everyone, therefore, who acknowledges me before others, I also will acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But whoever denies me before others, I will also deny before my Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And one's foes will be members of one's own household. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take up the cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Those who find their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it." This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Congregation may be seated. It's a heavy reading. To make sense of it, I have a story in 3 parts today. It's more of like an extended analogy. And as if an extended analogy isn't hard enough to track, I'm going to go ahead and add a second story as an addendum. So that's your roadmap for this sermon. You're welcome. Let's start with story 1, part 1. In 2014, the London Underground Union went on strike. The London Underground, that's the subway over there. And while the workers formed picket lines above ground, more than half of the subway lines below ground were shut down. And the strike cost the city thousands of dollars a day, and it affected millions of commuters. Frustration and tension mounted between the union workers, the commuters, and the City of London. Angry citizens were just enraged to find their usual routes to and from work and school unavailable. Strife, division, conflict gripped the city. Strife, division, conflict grip our text today. Which is weird because it's coming from Jesus, our Prince of Peace. He's teaching the disciples this lengthy teaching, and he wraps all of this confusing, dark stuff up with the most ominous claim of all about families and about why he's come. Do not think I have come to bring peace, but the sword. And I have come to bring it against families, to set son against father, daughter against mother, mother-in-law against daughter-in-law. You'll have foes in your own household. It is confusing and dark, especially for someone who just a few chapters ago was wrapped in swaddling clothes and laid in a manger. But Jesus says it, and he means it. Now, a common way to interpret this text and the vision that I grew up under with this text is to believe that all this fighting Jesus is talking about is going to be the natural result of us Christians calling out sinners, even when it is sinners in our lives, our family, our friends, our sons, our daughters, our parents. Division that comes naturally from us having to remind people that if they continue to live without Jesus, they're going to end up in hell. This text is Jesus handing us a sword of righteousness and telling us to get to work on his behalf. Maybe that's all true. But I find myself tired of all the swords being wielded in our culture right now in Jesus' name. So it has me thinking about another possibility today. Maybe Jesus doesn't see division as something that ultimately divides. Maybe Jesus doesn't need our help bringing the sword. And maybe in Jesus' hands, the sword he brings to families cuts open new paths. Story 1, part 2. With more than half the subway stations closed down during the strike, frustrated London commuters were forced to experiment with their usual routes. Still needing to get to their destination, they improvised and took different subway routes. How do you say it? Routes or routes? Thank you, Wendy. Either one. I'll use them interchangeably. So, they adjusted their traffic patterns to the strike. And mercifully, they only had to do this for a week because the strike came to a conclusion. The city and the union workers struck a deal. And within moments of them striking that deal, all the subway lines were opened again. But something strange happened. The stations were all available to the commuters, but the traffic patterns did not return to their pre-strike patterns. Ever. The commuters were acting different. Why? You'll have to hang on for a second. The question of why Jesus brings division is best answered by setting his words today in context. Our reading does not happen in a vacuum. And it doesn't just start with Jesus talking about division. You have to go back to last week and what he was talking about just a few verses before. Just a few verses before, Jesus is actually giving instructions to the disciples about a mission he is going to send them on. He is releasing them into the surrounding communities, and he says to them, I am sending you with authority over unclean spirits to cast out demons, to cure every disease and sickness. Take no provision. Rather, rely on the homes you enter for every need you have. Jesus is sending disciples into homes, into the most intimate relationships we have, and telling them to change what they find in those homes, to inject health into diseased systems and relationships, to cast out demons from broken homes, to expose dark rooms and dark deeds to light. And here's the truth about all of that. In Jesus' time and now, some people don't know how sick they are, how dark their homes have become, or how tightly demons have gripped their lives. And it is not going to be easy when you don't know that something is wrong, that someone saying they're of Jesus shows up and says you need to change and gets to work trying to straighten out your mess. It doesn't feel real great to hear how Jesus' word has something to say about your life needing to be different than what it is. It's going to feel a whole lot like Jesus is just trying to break things. But maybe, just maybe, things need to be broken. Story 1, part 3. Why were the commuters acting different? Why didn't subway traffic return to pre-strike patterns? Well, Cambridge University did a study on this strange thing that happened in the 2014 London underground strikes. They tracked the people who were forced to change their routes because their usual routes were closed. And what they found is that the people who needed to find new routes, a majority of them actually ended up finding shorter routes. Shorter routes that had been right under their noses, sometimes for years. And it was only when the subway system broke that they found a new, better way to commute. It's a sociological phenomenon called creative destruction. It's the idea that sometimes things have to break in order for creative gains to be made. Jesus speaks today about breaking and dividing families because ultimately the redemption of this entire broken creation begins with families, the most basic system we are all a part of. And I think that when Jesus promises to divide families, he is promising creative destruction. He's talking about breaking something that needs to be broken. He's talking about dividing families with the healing power of his word, his mercy, his way of life. I think that because if you look at the cross, it is all creative destruction. It is Jesus' body being broken on the cross to bring about eternal salvation for us. And it is that same creative destruction that he can bring to our lives here and now. To break things that probably need to be broken, the habits, the routines, the ways of life that probably feel normal, but aren't filled with joy or faith or mercy or hope. Those things in our families that need to be divided from us at times. And Jesus promises today that he will do it. Now, what does that look like? I know that I have been heavy in awe-inspiring subway analogy up to now. So here is my second story addendum. An example of what Jesus' creative destruction looks like, or did look like, for my family. Now, you have heard me talk about my dad being a recovering alcoholic. And I know I've talked about that up here before. But you have never heard about how he got into recovery when I was 5 years old. I do not have terrible memories of my dad drinking. A lot of it probably just, you forget. I do remember our Saturday morning routine. We had to be quiet and couldn't watch cartoons because Dad was sleeping on the couch. And I didn't know then what sleeping on the couch means, or the reason for my mother's red, tired eyes. I just knew our pattern, our routine. Well, one night, Dad got another DUI, and this one was one too many. So the factory that he worked for brought him in the next day and said, "Kevin, you have two choices. You can enter a 21-day inpatient treatment program, or you can clean out your locker today." So Dad chose the 21 days. I do remember those days. For 21 days, my family felt more broken than ever because Dad was gone, and Mom was even more stressed. It was hard, and in my head, it was like months. But yesterday, we celebrated their 50th anniversary and 41 years sobriety. And now I know that our family needed to break, that Jesus had come to divide us from the darkness and the sin and the shame-filled routine we were trapped in. It turns out those 21 days or the creative, destructive power of God's all-knowing mercy and love wrapped up in Jesus Christ. And today, in your hearing, Jesus is promising to bring creative destruction in your most intimate relationships, in your families, in your personal life. And he is going to challenge our most personal systems and routines and break into our habits and comfort to bring division into your life that ultimately, we hope, creates a unity you might otherwise have never known, to open a new route. And if you are in the middle of that breakage, don't forget what Jesus said at the very beginning of this text. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. For see, I am doing a new thing. Thanks be to God. Amen.